Hello and welcome to iCatholic. I'm Joe O'Brien. The word synod has taken centre stage in our church in recent months. It began last year when Pope Francis announced that a synod would be held in Rome in 2023. The Pope asked the whole church to reflect and report at the local level on what it means to be a listening church, a church that together discerns prayerfully the path ahead of us. In this programme, we will discuss the synthesis or report that has recently been published by the Diocese of Kildare and Leighlin as part of that synodal process. We will be joined shortly by Julie Kavanagh, Father Liam Morgan and Kildare Leighlin from the Diocesan Synodal Committee to have that discussion. But first we will get an overview of the synthesis from Kildare and from Jean Roche, and also hear from Bishop Denis Nulty.
Hello, my name is Jean Roche and I am joined by another member of the Diocesan Synodal Committee, Kildare Leighlin. Together, we are going to share with you the various steps that led up to the publishing of our Diocesan Synthesis and to give you a flavour of what is in it.
The tricky part that we have all had to learn and to understand is that when we talk about the synodal pathway, we're talking about both the Universal Synod that Pope Francis has called for 2023 and the preparations for the National Synod for the Irish Church. That will take place afterwards. What is simple to understand is that the first step on this synodal pathway was to play our part in the consultations for the Universal Synod. Pope Francis asked us to reflect and report at the local level on the key themes of communion, participation and mission.
So starting back in October 2021, Bishop Denis appointed 3 diocesan delegates to the Universal Synod and the Irish Synodal Pathway, 2 lay women and a diocesan priest. Pretty soon, these 3 delegates expanded into a diocesan synod committee of 7 men and women, 5 lay people and 2 priests. Together, we set about the task of promoting the synodal process in the diocese. We wanted to include as many people as possible.
So during the Advent season, we began posting weekly about the synod on parish newsletters and social media platforms. A timeline was put in place to prepare for a deep listening across the diocese under the banner Listening Lent. A dedicated synod page was set up on the diocesan website, and parishes were also encouraged to regularly pray the synod prayer. In the new year, the committee recorded a video inviting people to take part in the Listening Lent, and we created a toolkit for parishes to help them facilitate local conversations during Lent.
Contacts were also made with particular focus groups to try to bring the listening as wide as possible. Groups that engaged included the local third level colleges, the traveller community, members of the LGBTQ+ community, those in religious life, the prison community, primary and secondary school students, as well as the Polish and African communities. During the Listening Lent, 34 parishes took part in parish gatherings, either on their own or in a cluster of parishes. 171 individual and group responses were received from an online survey, 37% of whom were in the 18 to 29 age group. All the submissions were presented to the Bishop at the Chrism Mass, and a team of 11 people then got down to work on writing a synthesis that would honour all that had come from the process.
So what did people say? You can read the full document for yourself on the diocesan website. But here are some of the key points that emerged. Again, our task was to faithfully record and report on what was shared in the process. Within the synthesis, we can see the joy and the pain, the highs and the lows of our journeying together. Within the process, there was affirmation for this experience of the listening church. However, the enduring pain and hurt caused by the abuse scandals and their legacy, and the impact this has on people's participation in and trust in the church was also heard.
The synthesis registers the call voiced by many to include lay women and men in governance and leadership in the church. The need for training for lay involvement was also named. the role and place of women was raised in all spheres of the listening and was particularly noticeable in the contributions of young people. There was a very loud intergenerational call for more compassion and inclusion for people of the LGBTQ+ community. Young people spoke of the gifts they have to offer, as well as the difficulty that comes with a lack of peers when they do come to church. Their perception of the Church's treatment of women and the LGBTQ+ community represents a significant stumbling block in their participation in the Church. Members of the traveller community spoke of the pain and discrimination and judgment of them on the part of the church community and their lack of participation in parish ministry.
The listening revealed a wide diversity in the ways people like to pray and the spiritualities of people within the diocese. Good liturgy and good homilies were spoken of either as a reality or a desired reality. People want to learn more about the Word of God in Scripture, about faith and church teaching, in a way that speaks into contemporary experience of people. Appreciation for the local community and local clergy came across strongly. Regardless of people's level of engagement in the local parish, people expressed a real gratitude for the local church community at key times in life and in the church year, like Easter and Christmas.
Overall, the listening highlighted the reality that we are learning a new way of being together as church, and that hopefully the kind of listening we did over Lent is only the beginning. In other words, we have had an experience of synodality that now needs to become a habit.
Well, we hope you found that useful, and thank you to Nolene and Jean for giving us that overview. Before we move on to our panel discussion, we will hear from Bishop Denis Nulty, who gives us his reflections on the synodal pathway and the way forward.
And I welcome it warmly because it is showing the church, all of us as church, listening and walking with one another. It is a process of deep listening from beginning to end. And I couldn't have written it. A bishop couldn't write this report. This is a report written by the people of God about the church as they see it and is perceived at this time and place. I thank people for their honesty. People have engaged fully with this. What has struck me enormously in the report is how much the local is encouraged. The local priest, the local parish, the local group, the local outreach, all the time keep coming in for special mention. Obviously, any report will have criticisms or question marks over how the church is currently structured, and that obviously appears in our report. It appears in every report, and I think we learn from good criticism is healthy, and in ways and look and see what exactly can be done. How can we engage more with less and less vocations, with the demographic of priests getting older, with the engagement in parish and practice rate not huge in some parishes. We've got to show different ways of outreach. I think the synthesis maybe helps us to be a foundational document towards that. Is it going to be easy? It's not. There are no simple, quick fix solutions. Anyone who suggests that is not being honest, which is the other H in this. Honesty, hope, and hurt. I think we've got to do our very best to be honest with people and please ask them, please keep coming on this journey with us. This is just a first step. I think that some people will say that they're barely hanging on by and this is a last chance saloon for church to get it right this time. I think we've also got to be generous with one another. If we start the point of last chance saloon, or we've been here before and we've been let down, we've got to all try to be generous. This is a new journey we're on. Let's walk this journey together.
We're now joined by our panel to discuss the outcome of the discussions in Kildare and Leighlin. But first of all, how important was the process of listening itself? Julie?
Well, I think, Joe, the actual process of listening was fundamental to the whole experience. I think we now have a 10-page synthesis, which is really important, but even more important than that is how we actually got to those 10 pages. And in responding to the Pope's invitation to the whole world, to the whole church across the world, to listen to the people here in Kildare Leighlin, we really made a genuine and sincere effort to reach as many people as possible. And in that reaching out, to gather in the listening, to listen to one another in respect, and paying attention really to people's experience.
And did you hear anything that was surprising, Father Liam?
I don't think so, Joe. I think it was an opportunity that was welcomed by people, and they would have commented that they appreciated the opportunity to be asked and to express their views and opinions. And when you would look at the synthesis now in its completed form, it does raise the issues maybe of the inclusion of lay people, men and women. LGBTQ plus comes up. Also, it was an opportunity, I think, for people to express something of a legacy that is residual of the hurt and the scandals that have been part of our recent history. And I think for that reason, it was a very worthwhile process. And the voice of young people came across quite strong in it, and from the various different, say, focus groups. So it was an excellent opportunity for us to kind of gauge where we are and to listen to the ordinary experience of people in our parishes.
Father Liam mentioned there that young people were consulted and they had messages to deliver. What did they want to see?
The biggest thing for them was those who come to church are so disappointed when they see nobody of their own age group there. They said there are people who are older than them and people who are younger than them, but not their own peer. And the other thing they pointed out, which I thought was very interesting, is they said, we have gifts to offer the church, but you're not looking for them or not asking for them. We want an opportunity to show who we are and to be involved in church. And they still talked about wanting to be involved and want to be part of it. But it's difficult for them because they feel very isolated if they do attend a church.
Because so few of them are going
Because
to
there's
church.
so few of them there, yeah. And as I said, it's mainly older people and smaller children that are there, not teenagers, early 20s, that age group are not quite as visible.
If I was to ask each of you individually, what was the one standout point from your discussions that remains on your mind? What is the standout point?
I think it comes up across all generations, Joe, that the inclusion of women in the church and having a meaningful place, and to follow on there from Nolan's point of the young people that we consulted, that somehow for a young person, where they see in life today that really there is no glass ceiling that hasn't been almost penetrated in a sense, and the opportunity is there, and there's a sense in the context of culture and society to progress oneself, and somehow that doesn't quite match their experience of, say, church and the invitation and the welcome to have a meaningful role, whether it be governance or in terms of leadership or whatever that might be.
I'd echo what Liam said there as well, but also I suppose people's compassion really came through across, again, intergenerationally, that people wanted the church to be a compassionate voice and a compassionate face to the world. And I think also that sense of that people do have a desire for faith and to grow in that faith, but they want that faith to be very much part of their experience. So not an abstract, but really grounded in contemporary living and the contemporary experience of people. And that's really positive, because it's not around kind of having an idealized faith, but it's about having a lived faith where it really is beginning with people's experience and how we can bring God into that space and how we can, see God that's already there.
And if I might come back in there, Joe, that what came across for me too was how much people appreciated their faith, sense of community, coming together. And maybe given the pandemic, what was kind of taken away, we perhaps realised just how important it was. So just to follow on that point.
Nolene.
I think I'd be looking to see where do we go from here. And within a parish, something that came across to me very strongly for parishes is people are looking for what I'd say the 3 L's. They're looking for to be more involved in liturgy and to understand liturgy better. They're looking for learning. like there was an outcry for education in their faith, education in scripture, to make church teaching relevant to their daily lives. And the third L for me was leadership. That people wanted to see, as we've already mentioned, they want to see men and women taking leadership roles in the universal church, but also at local level. You know, the parish councils were mentioned with approval where they exist, but a request or a need for parish councils where they don't, because people who responded do want to be part of their local church.
And one of the outcomes as well, that the people felt that the church was in a mess at the moment. Do you share that view, that it's, things are kind of dismal?
Well, I think when people say the church is in a mess, in some ways I think it's that we're in a good reality check. You know, that we're not pretending that things are perfect. And I think that can only serve us well. Because
but they're far from perfect, aren't they?
They're far from perfect, but we're ready to face it, or we're willing to face it. And I think it's to have the courage to say, well, where is God leading us in this? You know, so that, I mean, if we pretend it doesn't exist, you know, we'll never actually begin to work towards where we need to go. But actually there's a kind of a refreshing sense of saying it's okay to say that actually we do need to take stock. We do need to kind of say, well, where actually are we called to go as a church, and what steps do we need to take in order to get there? And I think that's actually a very refreshing place to be.
But I feel, Joe, like that in what we are presenting in our synthesis, that there is an honesty, you know, and I do feel that it reflects what we would have heard in our conversations and in parish meetings, and a voice to people. And really, like Pope Francis, when he speaks about the synod, what he really desired was to hear the lived experience of people in terms of their parish or their church. And he speaks eloquently about that. Of that desire.
And I think added to that, and I think Pope Francis was very wise, I suppose, the influence of the Spirit on Francis, that he asked for this type of a synod, a listening synod, where people at parish level, or whether it was a class in school or the religious meeting together as a focus group, it was to listen without comment to what the other has to say. And I could always presume, and you know, one question, we mentioned youth already. I'd say every parish in this country bemoans the fact that young people are not showing up for mass, shall we say. Yet when we listened without comment to what the young people had to say, they said, we want to be there, we tried to be there, but give us a role there. And that issue came across very strongly for me when we met the members of the travelling community. What they would have said is, we're never asked to be minister of the word or minister of the Eucharist in our local parish, and we feel uneasy about coming forward and offering. So for people at parish level to listen to that being said, like you mentioned already about the mess, that's the mess, but as long as we can identify where the mess is, then we can start to do something about it.
Well, many people who took part in your discussions made the point that this is actually, or could be, the last chance for the institutional church to listen to the ordinary members of the church. Do you see this in those kind of terms as a last chance saloon?
I think we have an obligation to honour the people who have come out to be part of this process and who have a deep love for their faith and their church, who are deeply invested. And yes, I can echo and resonate with that comment. And for myself, and speaking on behalf of my colleagues here, Julie and Nulty, and others, I would like to see this process that we've begun being honoured, and to honour that honesty and faithfulness of people.
Well, that was an interesting discussion. And I'll just ask each of you for a final word on the whole issue.
A final
Julie.
word? Well, a final word for me would be a word of hope, that we've begun a journey, and I think we've lessons to learn, and that's always a good thing. But that I think I'd be very hopeful for Kildare Leighlin and for its people.
Nolene?
I think that we have started to listen to one another and not to presume that we know what somebody else thinks. And that's very important. And that one, in listening with respect to what another person says and how another person feels, and to have my voice heard with respect, is very important, so that we can go forward in honesty and with compromise, with compassion and with hope.
Father Liam?
I would have heard a clarion call for inclusion and I see that as being so important. And I think in terms of our own diocese and from the top, that there's a sincerity around wanting to respond to that felt need and deep desire.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you found our programme informative and maybe even inspirational. We need to continue to encourage one another as we walk the synodal pathway. Again, you can read the report from Kildare and Leighlin on candle.ie. And if you want to learn about the national report that will follow, you can log on to synod.ie. We look forward to you joining us again on iCatholic.